In today's video I make one of my all-time best-selling products, a Farmhouse Bench. I got some 2x6, 8-foot long from Home Depot, I think not more than 4, which are more than enough for making a bench in my style. As always, when you want to do something, dust collection is full, but here's how I usually empty my dust collection. It only takes a few seconds, not very difficult. See? Already done. First step after cutting, or second step I should say, after cutting those boards into the rough length, is I go over to my jointer to get a flat, like almost 100% flat side and a straight edge on it. I really love working with the jointer. I have this King Canada jointer that I bought a few years ago. It's a small jointer, but it has an 8-inch bed, which I really love because most jointers of that size have just a 6-inch bed. Always make sure that your edge is 100% straight or you have a 100% 90-degree angle. I make a little mark here on that edge so that I know later which side is the 90-degree angle. Move over to the planer. I usually don't know how or the thickness of the top of the bench. Usually I plane enough so that the boards are fine. Sometimes they have, I think it's around 35 millimeters thick, but yeah, I can't really tell. Every bench is a little different. The other side I trim off on my table saw. I could use the jointer again, but I know lots of you use the table saw for this. Only thing I would highly recommend is if you do that kind of work on your table saw, make sure you have the right blade on it. You really want the rib cutting blade and not just a universal blade, and of course not a crosscut blade. So after that is done, I bring the boards to my workbench and you see here that I rearrange the boards quite a few times. For this type of bench, I look what really looks the best. You could argue that I should alternate the grain, that I should pay more attention on to alternate the grain to prevent the board from warping later. But you will see later in this video that it won't be necessary because of the joinery I use. But yeah, usually I would highly recommend to alternate the grain and prevent the boards from warping. Yeah, I forgot here something very important. Before you do your glue up, put something underneath. Could be like a use here, just some paper, or you could use a foil, some plastic, or even a garbage bag. Everything works fine. But you definitely don't want to have lots of ooze out and lots of glue on your workbench. I put some clamps here. I use some clamps to clamp those boards together so that it's easier to apply that glue. Then you don't end up with all that glue between those boards. You have a nice surface where you can apply the glue. I know some of you might say you should never use your fingers without any gloves also, but yeah, I'm just not smart enough to do this, I guess. Okay, now it's ready to clamp. I use here pipe clamps, as you can see, and some smaller clamps to make sure I don't get steppings between those boards. I look under the clamp to see how the board rests on the bars, on the pipes, to make sure that it's not warped right from the beginning. And the better the pre-work is, the tighter the joint, or yeah, the joint is, even before you apply the glue, the better, because as you can see here, I don't even use a lot of pressure. You see people having like perfect close gaps, and they still put a lot of pressure on those clamps, which is, yeah, not necessary. Okay, here we are on the next day. Because I prefer to, when I do some glue up, I prefer to do it on the day one, or at least one day before, because I prefer to let the glue dry overnight. It's not, you don't necessarily need to wait that long. Maybe a few hours should do the trick. The warmer it is in your shop, the better, the faster it dries. But just for myself, I prefer to have it dry overnight. Okay, the leftovers from those 2x6 I use to make the legs out. You might wonder why I measure twice, one time on my workbench and one time and again here at the saw. But I do this to, so the first measurement is actually just to find out, is the board long enough for all the parts that I need later. And of course, I forgot a few parts. Those shorter parts I glue on the side of the longer parts. And it happens so often to me, and this is maybe because I don't make a plan or a cut list before I do a bench. And it always happens that I make not enough of those short parts. For some reason, my mind is stick to 4 pieces, but technically you need 8 of those, so I had to reproduce a few later. I use the bandsaw to cut the angle. I probably could use the miter saw for that, but the short parts are a little short, and I feel more comfortable doing this on a bandsaw. And honestly, I like the rough look that the bandsaw blade marks. I don't even bother to sand it out later. Now it's the time to glue those parts on. It's a little tricky, but with enough clamps you can easily do that. Again, I used my fingers to spread the glue. Yeah, not a good idea, I know. For this glue up, I use those Bessie uni clamps. Those are cabinet clamps that I really like, because I guess most of you guys know those clamps already. but they clamp always straight, which is really helpful in this situation. And again, you can never have enough clamps. I also did this a day before I assembled the whole bench. Okay, here I use my old Black & Decker belt sander. I know lots of people don't like those band sanders because they leave lots of deep marks on your boards, especially on softwood. But for this task I really like to use the belt sander, even though it leaves lots of marks on my board, especially like here when I sand across the grain. But hey, it's a farmhouse bench and I really like that rough look, and so the belt sander is also very good to remove all that ooze out from the wood glue. Yeah, it's a nice tool. You just have to know how to use it. The finished sanding, I use my 5-inch DeWalt orbital sander. I have here the Freud Diablo sand mesh or sand net, whatever it's called, on my sander, and I know it's technically it's just a knockoff from Abranet, but I like this sand net. It lasts a lot longer than the regular sandpaper that I use. I don't sand a lot on those benches, just to make sure everything feels a little bit smooth. So this is probably the most critical part on the whole project. I use my plunge router, an old cheap plunge router that I brought years ago from Germany with, to cut those slots. And the router bit that I use is a dovetail router bit, so that kind of gives you a clue how everything gets assembled. I use, or I put the legs on as a sliding dovetail. You know what I mean. So I make the opposite part for the sliding dovetail on the legs, so that I can later slide those legs into those slots. They help to keep, yeah, you can see this here right now. It helps to keep the board flat, prevents it from warping. That's what I didn't do the alternate grain when I did the glue up. And you don't need to use screws for that, which I really like. Here on my 14-inch bandsaw, I cut off a little bit on both sides from those dovetail legs. And the reason for that is because on one side it does not, or it can't go all the way through because the slot in the bench isn't long enough. But I also cut out the other side, or a little bit from the other side. Yeah, here I tap. Sometimes it goes easier, sometimes it's more difficult. Here I tap the legs into the slots with a little bit glue, You don't need a lot glue for that. It holds by itself pretty much. You just have to make sure that you do not hammer too hard on the legs so that you damage the wood, because yeah, it's still softwood. Yeah, this is some leftover wood that I have, and you will see this in a second what it's for. Trim them to the right length. I cut a 45-degree angle on both sides. I guess you already know what they are for. Don't need to explain that. Okay. I use just one screw and a little bit of glue to put those parts in. I would say that you always need them, because the bench is already very strong. The legs are already very strong, but it kind of reinforces the whole thing, and it makes the bench look better. Here another screw, just one. That's enough. Okay, these are the last parts, and then the bench is almost ready. Those is for the legs again. Again, I can't repeat this often enough, but if you do rip cuts, especially on softwood, use a rip cut blade for it. Move over to my smaller 10-inch bandsaw, where I make a little cutout and a little bit of sanding on this belt sander that I guess lots of people have. Not sure if I love or hate this belt sander. It usually does the trick, but I don't think this sander comes in a very good quality. So if I would spend a little bit more money, I could probably buy a better one, but yeah, it does the trick, and I don't use it that often. But yeah, I think it's okay. Yeah, to apply those little, what would I say? Is it feet? I don't know. For the legs, just with 3 screws on each side. It makes it look a little better. Lifts the bench a little more, because it's already a very narrow bench. And those cutouts that I did on my bandsaw are not only for the matter of give it a better look, but if if a piece of furniture rests on 4 separate parts, then it's less likely to tip than if it would be just a straight board on the bottom. Okay, this are little plugs that I made for those holes that are left from the sliding dovetails, and the hole is a little. That's very important. The hole is a little deeper than the plugs are long, because when it comes to seasonal movement, you see very often, or I saw in the past, that those little plugs kind of protrude because the board or the part where you sit on, don't know the English name, sorry about that, shrinks more than the feet, so that little plug comes out. So you want to have this little plug shorter than the hole is deep. I use a sanding block to kind of round all the sand and round all these little edges. Check if you still feel some tipping, but no, it's pretty good. So staining, this is probably the part that I absolutely hate the most. I hate it even more than sanding, to be honest. I know lots of people they like to apply the stain because it it gives a finished look, and I totally get that, but I'm not a I don't like painting. I'm not good in painting or staining. I hate everything from it, but it needs to be done. I use some gel stain here that I have had left on my shelf. Yeah, this takes forever. I hate it so much. I'm sorry, but I just hate it. No clear coat on it because it's just for myself. Okay, it's done. I really hope that you liked that video. If so, please give me a thumbs up, write a comment, and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.